We'll be looking at Hebrews. We'll be in chapter 12. The letter to Hebrews from start to finish is an inspired admonition and motivation to perseverance in the Christian life, which is the life that God has called us to live. We see here that in the face of trials and difficulties on every hand, we are called upon to endure unto the end, to continue to follow Christ no matter what, regardless. Throughout Hebrews, the writer teaches that one of the greatest dangers to the life that we are called to live is the remaining stationary or even going backwards. The danger is that we do not advance spiritually. We see that a call goes forth in Hebrews 3, verses 12 and 13. Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. And that was a danger, a departure from God. We also see in Hebrews 4, verse 1, let us therefore fear, lest the promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. It's failure. It's a spiritual failure. Hebrews 4, verse 11, let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. So it's a call to beware of spiritual falls. In Hebrews 6, verse 1, there is the encouragement, let us go on to perfection. That's an advancement. A call to always be moving forward. Hebrews 10, verse 33, there's the admonition, cast not away your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. The warning is, be careful what you cast away. Talking spiritually, be careful what you cast away. Hebrews 10, verse 39, but we are not of them which draw back unto perdition, but of them that believe. Be careful what you draw back from and into. So we see over and over there's these warnings concerning the danger of our spiritual life. We'd like this morning to read verses 1 through 3 of chapter 12, very familiar verses. Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 3. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin, particular sin, the sin, which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience or endurance the race that is set before us. As we run this race, here's what we're to be doing, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who, that is Jesus, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, or thinking lightly of the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him, Jesus, that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. So what we have here is a continuation of the theme of the whole letter, which is advancing spiritually. Not going backwards, but advancing, progressing spiritually. What we read here is part of the persuasion that the writer is attempting to stimulate and embolden the child of God to continue on, to advance spiritually. Now, what we read here is an application passage that really goes back to chapter 10, verse 38, and takes us through the end of chapter 11. Now, the subject of chapter 10, verse 38, we notice there in Hebrews 10, verse 38, the just, that's the justified or the saved, shall live by faith. There is also mention of those who draw back. The just shall live by faith, but there are some who claim to be justified who draw back. And in verse 39 of chapter 10, we read, we are not of them that draw back, but of them that believe or continue to believe, to the saving of the soul or to the end. The idea is persevering faith. That's the idea there in the latter verses of Hebrews chapter 10. And then you move forward to chapter 11, where we read of those who persevered in faith. We read of those who attained spiritually. And they did extraordinary things and extraordinary things, and they endured in their obedience to God in very difficult and trying times. And how did they do that? Well, we're told over and over throughout Hebrews 11, they did so by faith, or they did so through faith. And then we come to our text, where we have the practical application, the admonition, the encouragement, not to lose heart, but to continue on in the faith. So that'll be our subject this morning, how to keep advancing spiritually. Everyone here knows that we are to keep advancing spiritually. We're not to become stagnant. We're certainly not to draw back. But we are to continue to advance spiritually. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you continue to advance spiritually? And I believe we have the answers here in our text. But first of all, notice we have a description of the Christian life. It is likened to a race. And as you read about this race here, it's obvious a race of distance. It's not a sprint. It is a race of distance. It requires patience or endurance. So this life that we're called to live is likened to a race. That's the figure of speech that is used to illustrate the Christian life, which is the life that we're called to live. Now, in the New Testament, of course, there are several figures of speech used to illustrate the Christian life and the spiritual life, and that's to help you and I to understand the nature of this life. For example, in 2 Timothy 2, there you have the illustration of warfare. You have the illustration of farming, compared to the, again, used to illustrate the life that we're called to live. In other places, you have the relationship of master and servant, father and son. And again, the reason for these various figures of speech is because We're dealing here with spiritual matters, and he uses the physical, what you and I can understand, to describe these spiritual matters. So in our text, Hebrews 12, the Christian life, the life that we are responsible to live, the life that is to be the result of our salvation, is being illustrated under the figure of a race. Now notice what he says here. He calls it, in verse 2, the race. The race. I'm sorry, verse 1. The race. Not just any race, but it's the race. So it's a particular race. It is a specific race. Now notice what it says. The race that is. The race that is. That is, this particular race is present. This particular race is continual. It is the race that is set. It's already been set. You don't define the race. It's already been defined. It's already been set. You don't set the course. It's already been set. The race that is set. It's marked out. It's marked out clearly. It's marked out distinctly. So it is the race that is set. So it's not a race of our own choosing. The race has already been set. God has set the markers. God has set the bounds. The very word race implies that there are bounds. There are bounds, and these bounds, of course, are laid out in the Word of God. God has set the course. The course spans our life upon this earth. You cannot say, I've already run the race. No, you're still running the race. You may be coming to the end of the race. You don't quit toward the end of the race. You keep on running. So the race is still set before us. Well, I'm not in good health. I'm not what I used to be. That may be very so. But the race is set before us. It's before us. That means it's in front of us. Much of the race may be behind us. We've already run that. We've already covered that ground. But there's still the race before us. You can't rerun the race. All you can do is run what is before you. You can't go back and rerun. You can't start over. The race is set before us. So that speaks of the position of the race. It is before us. Every day, in all circumstances and situations, the race is set before us. So no matter how fast you run, no matter how much zeal and energy you put forth, and no matter how good and proper your form in running the race, and no matter how far you run, if you do not run the race that is set before you, guess what? It doesn't count. It doesn't count. You go to a track meet, and some joker decides, you know what, I don't want to run this race. I'm just going to run over here somewhere. And his form is excellent. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. He's got such zeal. It doesn't matter. Because he's running the wrong race. And many of God's people are running the wrong race. It is the race set before us. You have to run that race if it's going to count. And you cannot just run as you please. You can't reset the markers. You can't reset the lanes and have it count. The race is set. And again, I'm afraid many are running the wrong race. You hear a lot about the rat race, and that's the race that most are running. The rat race. The rat race is the wrong race. That's not the race that is set before us. So if we're going to live the Christian life, we must make sure that we're on the right track. Because if you're not on the right track, it doesn't count. It doesn't count. Far too many of God's people busy themselves, put forth their energy, running with the runners of the world, and they're running the wrong race. And guess what? It doesn't count. Well, I tried so hard. Doesn't matter. Doesn't count. I had good intentions. Doesn't matter. Doesn't count. You have to run the race that's set before us. So let's consider some of the implications of a race. First of all, it's descriptive of the character and manner of the life that we're to live. A race implies preparation, which means you cannot just stumble out of bed and live the Christian life. It requires preparation. You cannot just be driving your car down the road. You look out your window and there's a race going on. You pull over and just run that race. You don't do that. You have to prepare. There has to be preparation. A race implies that there's some exertion. Well, I want to run the race, but I don't want to exert myself. Well, those two don't go together. A race implies exertion. A race implies strenuous and determined effort, which teaches us that the life that we're called to live, of course, is not a life of ease. It's not a life of relaxation. Well, I'm getting up in years and it's time for me to stop serving the Lord. No, it's not. You may serve Him differently. May not be in the same way, but you don't stop because the race is still set before you. A race implies progression and advancement. Watch a track meet. You'll never see someone going backwards. They're always moving forward. They're always making progression. And they're making progression toward a goal. That goal being the finish line. That tells us that a race is a pursuit. It's the pursuit of the finish line. For you and I, it is the pursuit of Jesus Christ. It is being conformed to the image of Jesus Christ. That's our goal. And that's what we're to be progressing toward. A race implies a specified course, which means you are running in a certain direction. Well, I don't want to run in the direction of this track. I want to run somewhere else. You can't do that and be in the race. Once you go off course, you're no longer in the race. It implies a specified course. Well, I don't like the rules. Well, guess what? If you're going to run a race, you have to follow the rules. Well, I don't agree with them. They don't make sense. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you're going to run the race, you have to follow the rules of that race, or it doesn't count. So that implies that the life of a child of God is not random. It's not random. And I'm afraid there's a lot of children of God who are spending a lot of energy, and they mistake energy for living the life that they're supposed to live. A race implies, as we've already said, implies rules. It implies limitations. It implies bounds, which implies, of course, that the life we're called to live is not haphazard. A race implies concentration. A race implies there's a singleness of aim. Everybody has the same aim in that race, and that is to get to the finish line. There's perseverance, which teaches us that the life we're called to live is a very serious matter. Again, it is the race that is set before us. No matter what the conditions, no matter what the situation, no matter the circumstance, the race that is set before us. There's also the implication that the life of a child of God is a responsibility. It's a duty. The race that is set before us. It's true of every one of us. There is the race that is set before us. And it's before you every single day. And you have to do something with it. It's right there. You have to do something with it. And what is it that we're to do? We're to run the race that is set before us. It's not the race that we prefer. Well, I would rather live here, or I would rather live there. I would rather do this. It doesn't matter. It's not for you and I, it's not the race that we prefer. It's the race that is set before us. And we are to run that race. The implication is we are to extend ourselves. We're to stretch ourselves toward the goal of the race. There's to be effort put forth. Nothing half-hearted about running the race. And many, when it comes to sport, hobby, or work, they can put forth great energy and effort. But when it comes to the matters of God, they're too tired because they've been running in the wrong race. They're too tired to run the race that is set before them. So read it again and again. Run, run, run the race that is set before us. It does not say, observe the race that is set before us. That's not what it says. It says, run the race set before us. It does not say, comment. Be a commentator on the race set before us. A lot of God's people, they think they are the commentators. We'll tell you what's going on. We'll tell you who has the right. Well, they're not doing it right. And they're sitting in the stands. They're sitting in the stands. You think of spectators in a sporting event. There they are sitting in the stands, unfit for the most part to do what everybody else is doing that they're observing, and then they're commenting, well, he stinks. He's no good. and God's people are like that as well. They're not doing a thing, but they sure know what the other person who's doing something is doing wrong. And and for some reason they think they're qualified to be a commentator. And that's unfortunately the position that many of God's people have taken. So we're to run. We're not the spectators. We're not the spectators. We're the participants of the race. And our participation is not contingent upon people. It's not contingent upon who's in the stand, who's commenting. It's not contingent upon the other runners. It's not contingent upon circumstances. Our responsibility is simply run the race that is set before us. And you notice there are no exemptions made. Just run the race that is set before us. No exemptions. No disqualifications. Every child of God is to run the race. It is the duty of every one of us to be advancing spiritually, always running, always advancing. When the way is rough, run the race that is set before us. When the way is smooth, run the race that is set before us. Whether it be uphill or downhill, run the race that is set before us. Whether there be obstacles or no obstacles, run the race that is set before us. Whether the winds are behind you or blowing against you, run the race that is set before us. Whether there are friends or enemies, run the race that is set before us. Whether others are running with you or you are running all alone, you can't see any of the other runners, run the race that is set before you. Very simple. There's also the implication of difficulty. It says, run with patience the race that is set before us. The word patience here in the New Testament conveys the idea of endurance. So what is endurance? Endurance is the ability to bear pains and trials calmly and to keep going. That's endurance. It's the ability to manifest forbearance under provocation or strain. The truth is, it doesn't take a lot of people much to quit. Oh, this is too hard, I quit. That's not the Christian life. They said something about me and I'm just done. I'm not going to do it anymore. Well, you need a little bit of endurance. You need endurance. It's to be steadfast in the face of opposition. So the very word implies that there's going to be difficulty. There's going to be adversity. There's going to be some opposition. But you're to run the race. You're to keep on running the race. The race involves some pain. But you push through the pain and you run the race. The race is going to involve some trials, some difficulties. But you push through that and you run the race. We're to keep running the race. That's why it's a blessing. It's a blessing to see an old saint of God still serving the Lord. They have endured some things. And there's a lot to be said for that. The race, and you get somebody who's just newly saved and they just take off. Well, and people will say, man, they're just really moving. Give it some time. Time will tell. 6 weeks from now, they may not be running at all. Maybe they will. But time will tell. Time will tell. The race will take patience because it's run in a world that is actively opposed to God. But run with patience the race that is set before us. Keep running the race. Keep running. There will be, along the way, there will be runners who have fallen. You keep running the race. Unlike a track meet, there will be runners who are trying to pull you down along the way. You run the race. Unlike a track meet, there might be an obstacle put right in front of you with no warning. You run the race. At times, it will feel like you are running blindfolded uphill against a gale and through a minefield. But you just keep on running the race. So there are some dangers associated with the race. Notice verse 3. Consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. The dangers of this race are introduced by those two words, lest ye. Lest ye. The word lest, of course, is a conjunction. It conveys the idea of we want to prevent something from happening. We want to avoid something that is possible, lest ye. So what follows those two words, lest ye, is what you want to avoid while you are running the race. And in this specific case, we are to avoid two specific dangers. Dangerous conditions which we can fall into. Notice what it says. It says, lest ye be wearied. So there is the danger of weariness. Lest ye be wearied. That's more than lest ye become tired. Lest ye be wearied. It speaks of utter exhaustion, a depletion, being completely drained. There is the danger that while we are running the race, that we become spiritually exhausted, spiritually depleted, spiritually drained. That's a danger. The other danger is, and faint in your minds. I believe that is the result of the weariness. Spiritual exhaustion, spiritual depletion leads to spiritual fainting. So what is it to faint? Well, to faint, of course, is to pass out. It's to lose consciousness. Spiritual fainting is a loss of spiritual consciousness. So this faintness of mind is just the opposite of vigor and cheerfulness. It's basically a losing heart. We no longer have the heart to run the race. The spiritual exhaustion and depletion and draining results in a breaking of spiritual resolve, a sinking in spirit. The person no longer runs the race. And that leads us to the instructions. If we're going to run this race, if we're going to avoid the dangers of the race, we need to follow the instructions. The instructions for running the race. The instructions provide us the means of obtaining the perseverance for the race. If we follow the instructions, we will endure. But they're also a safeguard against the dangers of the race. So the instructions enable us to endure, and the instructions enable us to avoid the dangers. So let's look at the instructions. Verse 1. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. Observe those who are getting ready to run a race. What are they doing? Are they putting on coats? No. Are they putting on more clothes? No. They free themselves of weight. They free themselves of all encumbrances. A weight is something that hinders us. Doesn't have to be that which is sinful. In fact, the statement is weight and this sin, so they're distinguished. A weight would fall under the category of the cares of this life, Luke 21:34. May not be anything sinful about the cares of this life. Simply has to do with our earthly responsibilities and circumstances. They can become weights. And we're to lay aside those weights. Because these things can control us. The cares of life can control us if we allow them. And if they begin to control us, then they begin to hinder our progress in the race. And eventually, we become weary and we faint. You run with weights. The race is much more difficult. Many are running with heavy weights around their ankles. Many are trying to run with cement in their shoes. Many are trying to run with a load upon their back. And here's what they do. They've got a load on their back, and as they're running, oh, there's something, and you pick that up too. Oh, there's something, they pick that up too. And all along the way, they just keep picking up more weights. And then they say, oh, I'm just so tired. Well, I wonder why. I wonder why. I'm not getting anywhere. It must be so-and-so's fault. No, it's your fault. You picked up all the weights that are wearing you out, and is eventually going to lead to you not running the race at all. You can identify these people. They're always picking up things in the world. They're not going to last. They're not going to endure. You can only run with so much weight. Eventually, you're going to collapse. You're going to faint. You're going to cease to run the race. So we're to lay aside every weight. Running with weights will result in weariness and faintness. How do you lay aside every weight? Because there are weights that we carry. Psalm 55:22, cast thy burden upon the Lord. You get a weight, give it to the Lord. Get rid of it. Cast it away. We're to also, number 2, we're to run free of entanglements. Notice what it says. Lay aside and the sin which does so easily beset us. Sin has the ability to hem us in. Sin has the ability to entangle us. Remember Pharaoh. He thought, they are entangled in the land. Now's my chance. They're entangled in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. That pretty much describes many a child of God. They are entangled in the land. The things of life have shut them in. If we're going to run the race, sin has to be dealt with. Has to be. Thirdly, we're to run focused. Verse 2, looking unto Jesus. In all athletics, I don't care what sport we're talking about, the placement of the eyes is of extreme importance. Your eyes have to be in the right place. How many times growing up, keep your eye on the ball, keep your eye on the ball. Placement of eyes. Very important. When you're running a race, you can't run looking at your feet. You're going to fall. You can't run looking at who's in the grandstand. You can't look back at the ground that you've covered. You have to place your eyes ahead on the goal. And in our case, the goal is Jesus. Looking unto Jesus. He's the goal. He's what we're aiming for. Christ-likeness. Looking unto Jesus. That's a very simple expression. Contains nothing hard to be understood. Someone says, look at me. Look at me. Well, what do you mean? There's nothing to explain. It's very simple. Look at me. Looking unto Jesus. How do we do that? By faith. Jesus Christ is the object of faith. In salvation, we look to Jesus alone. And in running the race that follows, or the life that follows salvation, the way to continue on in that life is to look unto Jesus. It hasn't changed. Look unto Him. Look away from the other runners unto Jesus. Well, he's not running right. Don't get caught up in that. You look unto Jesus. Well, he's getting in my way. You look unto Jesus. Look away from the other runners. Well, this is difficult. You look through the difficulties to the goal, Jesus Christ. You look through, you just continue to look unto Jesus. This isn't a casual glance. It is a continual looking, steadily fixed, intent, looking unto Jesus. We'll have our eyes upon Him. He's the goal. This is why so many quit running the race. This is why they get tired. Because they got their eyes on the wrong thing. Look to Him. Looking at Jesus, we see who He is. Looking to Jesus, we hear what He speaks. Looking unto Jesus, we follow where He leads. It's a submissive look. It's an affectionate look. The heart is occupied with Jesus Christ. Looking unto Jesus, again, we see everything that He is. That provides us encouragement. It keeps us from getting entangled in the affairs of life. And again, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are, looking unto Jesus. That's the way to run the race. Looking unto Jesus. And what do we see? Well, we see His motive, who for the joy that was set before Him, the glory and will of God was His joy. We're to copy that. That's to be our joy. It's what He lived for. Wherever Christ was, in whatever circumstances He was in, this was His joy, to do the Father's will. That attitude we must have if we're going to run this race. We see His steadfastness. It says He endured the cross. He endured the cross. We're not called upon to endure the cross that He endured. We're called upon to endure some obstacles, some difficulties. But He endured the cross. In other words, nothing could move Him from His Father's work. Nothing could move Him. That's to be us. We see His thinking. Despising the shame. That is, He thought very lightly of the shame that was entailed in the cross. He saw the spitting, He saw the mocking, He saw the scourging, He saw the false accusations, He saw the agony of suffering, and He thought, this is nothing compared to the joy of doing the Father's will and glorifying His name. I'll do these things to glorify God. That needs to be us. So it's look unto Him, follow His example. And then notice something else. He had the victory and is set down at the right hand of God. We look at Jesus. We don't see one who's defeated. If I look over at another runner, I may see someone who is completely defeated. That's not going to encourage me. But if I look to Jesus, I see one who's endured everything and He's victorious. And I get strength and encouragement. And then lastly, we're to run remembering Jesus. We're to run looking to Him, and then verse 3, for consider Him. Consider Him. Ponder Him. Think about Him. Give attention. to Jesus Christ. As you run the race, meditate upon Him. Don't get stuck on what other runners are doing or have done or haven't done. Think upon Him. Think upon who He was. Think upon who He is, and He is who He was. Think upon the place that He took. Think upon the infinite perfection of His character and deeds. In everything you do, everywhere you go, consider Him that endured such contradiction of sinners against Himself. Jesus Christ endured that which was bitter. He endured that which was severe. He endured that which was malicious. He endured everything which the evil wits of men and Satan could invent. And He endured it all. Consider Him. He also endured the outpoured wrath of Almighty God. He endured Satan. He endured the betrayal of His followers. He endured mockery and slander. He endured the horror of Calvary. He endured it all. Consider Him who endured. And run the race that is set before us with patience, with endurance, the same endurance of Christ. He endured it all. He never turned aside from the path of duty. He never abandoned His God-given commission. It didn't matter what anyone else did. He endured. That's how we're to run this race. He remained steadfast and finished the work which had been given Him to do. So how do we get the endurance? How do we avoid the weariness and the faintness? Running free of weights, running free of entanglements, looking at Jesus, considering Jesus Christ. That is the key. These are the keys to living the Christian life. I'm trying so hard. Sometimes you have to just not try so hard and just look unto Him. Just look unto Him. Just think about Him. Well, brother so-and-so said something that's got me discouraged, so I just don't feel like running the race anymore. Look unto Him. Consider Him. Don't let an individual, I don't care who the individual is, you do not let an individual affect your relationship with the Lord. You run the race. You run the race. You encourage others to run the race. And the best way to encourage others to run the race is for you to keep running the race. Many times I have heard of individuals who have quit. And I've seen individuals quit. And it's discouraging. It's depressing. But you can't stay there, or you'll be them. You will be them if you stay there. You've got to get out of that mindset. And the way to do that is look unto Him. Consider Him. Yes, a runner has fallen. You just keep running. You just keep running. They're not the determining factor on whether you run the race or not. We have a life before us. Compared to a race, we are the participants in that life. We are not the spectators. We are the participants. No one can run the race for us. We are the participants, not the spectators. God help us to always remember that. Brother Ben, if you'd come and lead us in verse song.